Hello everyone, I'm Hassan Akram. I work as an RA to Chair Economic Security at Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Today we have got a very special guest with us, none other than Mr. Saqib Shirani, who is an economist as well as the founder and CEO at Macroeconomic Insights Private Limited. So, how are you, sir?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
ओके तो मिस्टर साकिब शिरानी साहब से आज हम इकोनॉमी पे कुछ सवालात करेंगे सर अगर हम देखें कि करंटली आवर इकोनॉमी इज इन क्राइसिस लाइक वी कैन लिटरली विटनेस एन इकोनॉमिक मेल्टडाउन सर और अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है इन्फ्लेशन भी बहुत ज़्यादा है प्लस हमारी जो डोमेस्टिक करेंसी है वो डिवैल्यू हो रही है तो आपके नज़दीक क्या मेजर ऐसे इकोनॉमिक इशू है जिसका आजकल जो है हमें सामना करना पड़ रहा है एज ए नेशन सर राइट
So basically, this is not the first economic crisis that Pakistan is experiencing. This is we are hoping to resume an IMF program, and this IMF program would be our 23rd program with the fund, which means that we've had balance of payments crisis 23 times since 1958, right? When we first went to the IMF. So the issues have pretty much been the same. I mean, you can have crises because of terms of trade shock. You can have crises because of banking crisis or whatever. But Pakistan invariably gets into this mess. I would say economic mess for a number of reasons. One is, I think, the most fundamental is that we are not organized for development structurally and institutionally, and because of this we've not really focused, unlike many other low-income countries that have become dynamic and moved into the middle-income cohort. We've not focused on export-led growth for the past 30, 40 years. So we've missed the first and the second wave of globalization, unfortunately. Pakistan has not focused on domestic resource mobilization and to organize itself for that. And as a result of these things, we find that the twin gaps in Pakistan have really, sort of been out of control for a long period of time, protracted periods of time. The fiscal deficit is extremely elevated, and because of that, we accumulate public debt to the point where now we are sitting at about 74% of GDP. Maybe 10 years ago, we were at around 50% of GDP. Right? So the accumulation of public debt is quite severe. And our export to GDP ratio is only, the export sector as a percentage of the entire economy is only about 10% or less than 10% of GDP. Now, this compares with about 18 to 19% for India, 19% for Bangladesh, and 107% or 100% plus for Vietnam. Right? So, a large economy with a very large population, with structural dependency on imports because of energy imports, for example. We obviously rely almost exclusively on energy imports. Because of this, we have very large import needs and we can't meet them from our export sector. So we regularly tip into this cycle, boom bust cycle, balance of payments crisis. The currency, obviously contracts very sharply or falls very sharply. And because of that, we lose a few years resetting the economy back to where the industry starts getting back on its feet, but it takes a few years. It adds to unemployment, it adds to poverty, and we experience very high inflation. All the regular symptoms that you would expect from a crisis like this.
Fine, sir. So you mentioned that we have been facing the kind of similar economic problems over the years. But sir, my question is like we have passed over 7 decades. But why is it that why these problems haven't been kind of overcome, sir?
I think that's a very fundamental question, and it goes back to what I said about we're not organized for development as a policy, as a polity. So when I say that, what do I mean? I think the first and foremost thing is that we have very strong elite capture in Pakistan, right? And the ruling elites in Pakistan, like in some other unfortunate countries in Africa and some other places, run a political governance model where they extract rents. Either they receive geopolitical rents or they extract domestic rents. They're not interested to have a competitive, productive industrial base. or to have export-led growth. So they are happy in just extracting the rents that they get, and because of that, we've been stuck or frozen in this semi-development, or now probably less than semi-development paradigm, where we just have not been able to get out of it. So I think a large part of the problem is elite capture.
Fine, sir. And sir, what's the way forward? Like how we can kind of deal with it, the elite capture and such kind of structural impediments like that.
Yeah. I think that's a $1 million question, and it's very difficult for countries that experience elite capture to break out of it, because the economic and political power is concentrated in the elites, and the rest of the country, the citizens of the country, are disconnected from the power and economic structures and the political structures, and therefore they can't effect change. And the only way change has come in some countries, where they've managed to overthrow elite capture to some extent, has come from street protests or protest movements. Otherwise, it's expecting the insiders in a system who are invested in a status quo or beneficiaries of a status quo to change themselves, and that doesn't happen. Nobody gives up their economic incentives, their economic and political power, voluntarily. So I think it's a very difficult question, and Pakistan is not the only country experiencing elite capture or struggling with how to change it. Many other countries, Argentina is a prime example, Egypt is another example, and both countries have, very similar to Pakistan, repeatedly had balance of payments crises, repeatedly have had economic crises, and have repeatedly gone to the IMF. So very similar.
Fine, sir. And sir, last but not the least, there is one question. अगर हम news देखें तो आजकल हर जगह there are these growing kind of concerns on our default checks, sir. कि लोग कह रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान जिस तरह से हमारी करेंसी डिवैल्यू हो रही है और हमारे फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व जो है सर वो dwindle हो रहे हैं, तो अब ऐसे लग रहा है कि पाकिस्तान जो है it's going to default. So in your understanding, is it true?
So I think the delay that we've seen resuming serious negotiations with the IMF, there's a delay of about 5 to 6 months because of this government's intransigence, lack of understanding, or not recognizing the gravity of the situation. Right? So they wasted about 5 or 6 months. We should have had these discussions with the IMF 6 months ago. Without the IMF, there is no way out right now. Right? Pakistan only has one option, one good option, which is the IMF, and it's relatively not that great an option, especially politically for the government, but it's the only option. The other option is not a good option at all, which is that you just let things slip and you announce a default. Right? So that would be a disorderly default. So what we've been, some economists, including myself, over the past 1 year, we've been saying that Pakistan, one, will need the IMF. Two, we will need to start negotiations for an orderly debt restructuring process. We will need that, otherwise our debt in the medium term is unsustainable, especially our external debt.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Indeed, it was a very enlightening and very insightful answers from your side within a very short span of time, sir. Thank you so much, sir.